I watched a man at the cafe this morning. He was just staring so intensely at his phone.
Oh, yeah.
His thumb was, hovering inches above the send button on a message.
I think we've all been there.
Totally. He'd type a few words, then delete them, check the time, let out this long, heavy sigh.
Mm-hmm.
So I finally caught his eye, asked if he was okay, and he gave me this weary, self-deprecating smile.
What did he say?
He said, "I'm just trying to figure out if sending this now makes me look desperate or if waiting until tomorrow morning makes it look like I've already moved on."
Wow. It's a lot of calculation for one text.
Exactly. To him, it was just a stressful social calculation, a whole mess of vibes and gut feelings about someone he'd been seeing.
He wasn't looking at spreadsheets or data points, I'm guessing?
Not at all. He was scrolling back through weeks of their chat history, measuring the silent gaps between replies like some kind of detective.
Right.
And he explained that it wasn't really about the content of the text anymore. It was about the timing.
The timing.
He literally whispered to me, "If I hit send now, the risk of a blowout is too high. But if I wait for the right window, the odds change."
That's fascinating. He's talking like a risk analyst.
He is.
Yeah.
And he just laughed it off, said he was just being neurotic, a personal quirk to get through a Tuesday. But then something shifted.
Okay.
A news notification flashed on his screen. A major merger in his industry. And his entire demeanor it changed instantly. He completely stopped worrying about the text.
And what did he do?
He immediately started scanning his contact list, but not for his own bosses, for his former colleagues.
Interesting.
He was muttering, "If the guys at the top are moving, then the whole structure of my department is about to tilt. I need to see who's still connected to who."
So he went from personal risk to professional network analysis in a split second.
In a split second. That transition from obsessing over a single message to instinctively mapping this complex professional network, it was just so striking. He thought he was just playing it safe or staying informed. But in reality, his brain was performing this sophisticated econometric feat that most standard models can't even touch.
He was treating his life not as a series of averages.
Exactly. He was seeing it as a path-dependent, nonlinear survival game. And it just made me realize that while we think we're just living our lives, we are actually. We're operating as undercover econometricians, using deep learning logic every single day without ever realizing it.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And that story, that sudden switch from relationship risk analysis to professional network risk, that really captures our central mission for this deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to unpack this sophisticated, intuitive human capability that so often outperforms traditional rigid models.
And the core insight, I think, is that our brains are automatically computing these incredibly complex factors.
Like path dependence, nonlinearity.
And network effects, absolutely. We go so far beyond that simplistic assumption of perfect rationality.
Which is why we need to know. Why does this human intuition matter for business strategy? How should it reform AI development?
And maybe most importantly, why we need to change how we educate people about the economy in the first place.
Right.
What's so fascinating there in your story is that he was applying survival analysis to a text message.
Survival analysis, right.
He was trying to model the time to event, the emotional blowout, as he put it.
And then, boom, network theory.
Instantly, he applies network theory to the merger, that instinctive understanding of systemic risk and dynamic timing. It just shows that humans don't see life as a static equation.
Where every input has a predictable linear output.
Not at all. We see it as a constantly evolving complex problem where context and history, they determine the outcome.
So if our brains are already doing this, sophisticated analysis, where did traditional economics go so wrong? Let's start there with the foundational flaw of the old guard, the theoretical ideal of the perfect agent.
Okay, yeah. For decades, neoclassical economics was just built on this premise of unbounded rationality.
Unbounded.
And this wasn't just a compliment to human intelligence. It was an extreme theoretical requirement.
What do you mean by requirement?
Well, to make a single decision, the theory required that the agent must be preloaded with the entire complex problem.
So everything up front?
Everything. They had to know every alternative choice available and possess a perfectly precise utility function. Basically, a perfect ranking of all their preferences.
Which sounds impossible.
It is. Only then could they calculate the optimal choice that guaranteed maximum utility. It required, essentially, infinite computational power.
Which, as anyone who has tried to decide what to order for dinner knows, is completely divorced from reality.
Right. We don't have infinite time or mental capacity.
And that's why Herbert A. Simon's work on bounded rationality was so crucial.
So crucial. Simon recognized that these perfectly rational decisions are often just not feasible in practice.
Why not?
Because natural decision problems are incredibly complex. They can be intractable. We just have finite computational resources.
You mean things like limited attention, limited memory?
Limited time. All of it. Bounded rationality revises that whole notion that we are perfect calculators.
Okay, so if we can't calculate the absolute best, the optimum solution, what do we do instead? What was the key consequence of bounded rationality?
We shift. We shift from being optimizers to being satisficers.
Satisficers.
Instead of engaging in that complex, exhaustive cost-benefit analysis needed for the absolute optimal solution.
Which would take forever.
Exactly. The boundedly rational human agent seeks a satisfactory, adequate solution based only on the information they have readily available.
So you're saying they choose something that just meets their adequacy criteria, something good enough.
Good enough is the perfect phrase for it. It saves the time and computational resources you'd need to find the theoretical best.
That's totally the man in the cafe. He wasn't trying to find the perfect time to send that text to maximize his romantic utility.
No, of course not.
He was trying to find a safe time that minimized his risk of looking desperate or moved on. He's absolutely satisficing.
Precisely. And Simon had this fantastic analogy for how we accomplish this, even with our limits. He called it the pair of scissors.
A pair of scissors?
Yeah. One blade represents our cognitive limitations, our finite capacity.
Okay.
And the other blade represents the structures of the environment.
So how do they work together?
Our minds compensate for their own limits by actively exploiting known structural regularity in the environment. We look for patterns, for rules, for shortcuts, because we simply cannot process the full chaos.
So once we accept that we are satisficers, that we're using these shortcuts, we also have to acknowledge that these shortcuts, or heuristics, they lead to systematic, predictable deviations from the strictly rational model.
And that is exactly the territory of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky and their revolutionary prospect theory.
Right. This is where psychology comes crashing into economics.
They move decision science out of pure mathematics and straight into cognitive psychology. They meticulously documented how and why our decision-making diverges from that old neoclassical prediction.
And what was the big takeaway from prospect theory?
It demonstrated that decisions are often rooted in irrational processes, and they're heavily influenced by emotion.
Especially how we react to potential gains versus potential losses.
That's the heart of it, yes.
So what were their core generalizations, the things that showed these predictable deviations?
Well, there are three main areas. First, and this is a big one, we treat gains differently than we treat losses.
How so?
The pain of losing $100 is generally felt much more strongly than the pleasure of gaining $100.
That's loss aversion.
That's loss aversion. And it explains why investors will often hold on to failing stocks for way too long.
Just to avoid that feeling of crystallizing the loss.
To avoid that feeling, exactly.
I see that everywhere. We really do hate losing more than we love winning. Okay, so what's the second generalization?
Outcomes that are received with certainty are massively overweighed relative to uncertain outcomes.
The certainty effect.
Yes. And this means that moving from, say, a 95% chance of winning to a 100% chance, that feels exponentially more valuable than moving from a 50% to a 55% chance.
Even though the mathematical difference is the same 5 percentage points.
It's the same, but it doesn't feel the same. And this drives behaviors like paying excessive premiums for warranties or insurance policies.
Just to eliminate that tiny sliver of remaining risk.
To get to that 100% certainty, yes.
And the third one, the framing effect. That seems like it has massive implications for marketing, for policy, for everything.
It really does. The framing of a problem significantly affects the final choice you make.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. If you frame a medical treatment as having a 90% chance of survival, that's a gain frame, people are much more willing to accept it.
Okay.
But if you frame the exact same treatment as having a 10% chance of death, a loss frame, far fewer people will accept it. The mechanism, achieving gains versus averting losses, it actually alters the final decision.
Proving that emotional triggers are really at play here.
Absolutely.
So, if our own internal cognitive biases can steer us off the rational path, what happens when outside constraints like severe stress short-circuit that process entirely? That's where we get into the psychology of scarcity.
This research is so incredibly important, especially for things like development economics. Scarcity, experiencing poverty, or being under excessive financial debt, it captures your attention.
It narrows your focus.
Severely. It reduces your mental bandwidth for other, broader tasks.
That makes so much intuitive sense. If you're worried about where your next meal is coming from, you just don't have the mental space for complex budgeting or long-term planning.
Exactly right. And while that focused attention might make someone, say, highly efficient at comparing prices in a market a kind of hypervigilance,
the overall effect is negative.
It's detrimental to the broad cognitive performance you need for sophisticated decision-making. We have some really striking experimental evidence of this in the U.S.
What did that show?
Low-income individuals exhibited reduced cognitive performance when they were exposed to scenarios involving large financial stakes.
And crucially,
high-income individuals, when faced with the exact same financial stakes, did not show that drop.
Which suggests the problem is the load of scarcity, not some inherent intellectual trait.
It's the cognitive load. 100%. And we saw this replicated beautifully in a field setting with Indian sugarcane farmers.
Oh, this is a famous study.
It is. They showed significantly lower cognitive performance when their finances were tight, which was before the harvest,
right,
compared to their performance post-harvest when they had money. The stress induced by poverty, rather than any fixed trait, is what drives the reduction in decision-making quality.
So the rational model is it's effectively dead for human decision-making.
For most real-world applications, yes.
Since we are boundedly rational and we're resource-constrained, we have to rely heavily on heuristics, those simple rules of thumb, just to manage the crushing complexity of the world.
Heuristics are necessary tools.
Yeah.
There's no other way. They allow boundedly rational agents to manage complexity without resorting to strict optimization.
Which is often computationally impossible anyway.
It is. The best way to illustrate this is by comparing simple and complex situations.
Give us that classic comparison.
The contrast is often drawn between tic-tac-toe and chess.
Okay.
Both are games with finite rules and perfect information. Theoretically, you could compute the optimal move every single time. But in chess, the sheer number of possible positions in the state space is just astronomical. It means that optimal choices are simply not possible due to our mental constraints.
So you have to use heuristics.
You have to. Control the center, develop pieces quickly. You use these rules to form a satisfactory solution, not a perfect one.
And you have to look at complex problems to see how we work around those cognitive limits. We see this play out in huge social arenas like heuristic-based voting.
Got a perfect real-world example.
Belfort.
Right. They're facing thousands of candidates and policies. They have limited time, limited information, limited attention.
So trying to gather and process all available information for a truly optimal choice is...
It's prohibitively time-consuming. It could take years of full-time research.
So instead of engaging in that impossible, comprehensive evaluation, the voter just resorts to a cognitive shortcut.
They rely on heuristics. This could be voting based solely on party affiliation or a quick assessment of a candidate's appearance, or maybe focusing on just a single policy issue that matters to them.
So the heuristic serves the goal of making a decision with low information cost.
Right, rather than the theoretically optimal one based on full knowledge. The trade-off is efficiency for accuracy.
This brings us right back to the heart of the Undercover Econometrician. We've established that humans are naturally nonlinear, we're bound by resources, and we rely on these heuristics. So now let's see this intuition applied at scale, particularly in corporate strategy.
Yes. This is where human intuition really starts to operate like a sophisticated neural network.
And this ability to connect disparate nonlinear factors often allows experienced strategists to anticipate problems that traditional linear models,
which are essentially just optimized averages,
that they fail to predict.
Exactly.
The story of the logistics director illustrates this so perfectly. He saw risk where the spreadsheets just saw smooth sailing.
Right, this operations director. He was overseeing these massive global supply chains.
And his company's models, which were built on straight-line growth projections, they all dictated using a specific, seemingly efficient route.
But he, the human neural network, was mapping so much more than cargo volume.
What was he mapping?
He was mapping the informal dynamic relationship structures between port authorities, local union leaders, and even historical regional weather patterns.
So his mental model was inherently network-based. It wasn't linear at all.
Not at all. He instinctively recognized that in a complex system like that, a minor delay, some nonlinear, unpredictable shock in one minor port could cross an invisible threshold.
And trigger a massive cascading failure across the entire region.
A cascading failure. This network analysis, which he just performed in his head, predicted a systemic failure that the linear optimized models completely missed.
And because he acted weeks before the models ever predicted a problem, he saved millions. His success was rooted in a high-level survival analysis that really understood systemic risk.
And when he looked at his organization and its environment, he wasn't seeing a fixed entity.
No, he was seeing an organism, something constantly in motion.
And that perspective aligns perfectly with complexity theory, which views organizations as complex adaptive systems, or CAS.
The CAS framework seems essential here.
It is. Complexity theory emphasizes constant interaction, non-linearity, and these continuous feedback loops that define the system. Organizations are fundamentally CAS because they are dynamic networks of individual agents.
Whose relationships are constantly shifting.
Constantly shifting, yes.
So what are the key principles of a complex adaptive system?
Well, CAS exhibits self-organization, emergence, and crucially, co-evolution.
Co-evolution. What does that mean in this context?
It means the system and the agents within it change each other. The system, sets light constraints on agent behavior, the official rules of the company.
But the agents,
the employees, the partners, they constantly modify the system itself just by interacting with it. And that leads to emergent properties that no single agent ever intended.
This idea of continuous change implies that organizations aren't operating in some stable equilibrium, but
they're operating near the edge of chaos.
That's critical insight.
It is. Organizational environments co-evolve near that edge, where there's just enough structure to prevent a total breakdown, but enough flexibility to innovate and adapt.
So to avoid failure in these highly turbulent environments, rigid, top-down command and control structures are basically toxic.
They're toxic. They simply cannot match the complexity of the outside world.
So the complexity itself demands that the organization structure has to be decentralized and fluid?
It necessitates moving toward flatter, more flexible, non-hierarchical network structures.
And that kind of design fosters the agility and decentralized decision-making you need.
To cope with that turbulent environment, yes. The structure of the company has to reflect the adaptive nature of the system it is embedded within.
So let's talk more about the core logic that the undercover econometrician is instinctively using. This idea that the world is deeply nonlinear and path-dependent.
Path dependence is basically memory. It means the consequence of an action depends heavily on the historical sequence of events that led up to it.
So a minor comment in a meeting today might be innocuous.
But if it happens after a series of management changes, when the system is already stressed, it might trigger a disproportionate nonlinear reaction.
A tipping point.
A tipping point, exactly.
And we manage this nonlinear world by constantly applying dynamic risk management or time-to-event thinking.
We implicitly understand that risk or hazard is not a constant average over time. You don't just assess the final static risk, you assess the trajectory of risk accumulation.
Go back to the man in the cafe deciding when to send his text.
Perfect example. Delaying that text response is a form of dynamic risk management. He's recognizing that the risk profile, the risk of looking desperate, it changes based on the timing of the event relative to the history of their conversation.
But wait, isn't anticipating risk accumulation just common sense? Why does the standard linear model miss something that seems so obvious?
Because linear models often treat outcomes as binary or static. Did the failure happen, yes or no? They miss the subtle, quiet accumulation of risk over time.
So they don't see the buildup.
They don't see the buildup. As we noted earlier, people rarely quit a job on the worst day. They quit on the last day, when the cumulative exposure to frustration pushes them past that final comfort threshold.
The linear model only looks at the average stress level,
not the total accumulated load over time.
And the other piece of this complex deep learning is recognizing that outcomes are governed by network structure. This is the logic of social network inference.
Or what the AI world now models as graph neural networks.
Right.
We intuitively know that outcomes are relational. Things like fear, confidence, opportunity, they propagate through our social and economic connections.
So when that merger news flashed on the cafe man's phone, he immediately started mapping the network.
He had to. He was checking who was connected to his former colleagues because he knew the risk was structural, not just individual.
He was instinctively mapping centrality and resilience within that network.
That's exactly what he was doing. And it's a perfectly rational inference in a networked environment.
How so?
When someone you know professionally fails or relocates, Your own perceived risk changes, even if your individual job has not changed at all.
Because the network structure has shifted.
The network has shifted, and your resilience is systemic, not isolated. The attribute of the individual is secondary to their position within that structure.
So if human intuition is so effective at managing nonlinearity and network effects, the next logical step has to be figuring out how to teach our machines to incorporate that logic.
And this is the heart of human-centered AI, or HCAI.
This feels like a fundamental shift in how we think about technology.
It is. We are moving away from trying to just automate human judgment and toward creating sophisticated collaborators that can incorporate the contextual, intuitive judgment of an expert.
Let's look at how this synthesis works in practice. I think the example of Clara, the software architect, and the experienced nurses is a great one.
It is. So Clara was tasked with designing an AI to predict hospital readmission risk.
Okay.
And the initial models were accurate on all the technical metrics, but the doctors and nurses, they distrusted them.
Why? What was wrong with them?
They were too rigid. They only looked at cold, hard facts, age, previous conditions, number of medications.
The stuff that's easy to quantify.
Exactly. And Clara realized that the most experienced nurses were using their undercover econometrician skills. They were assessing that nonlinear time-to-event risk based on cues the machine was totally ignoring.
Cues like what?
Like the subtle tone of a family member's voice on the phone, or the nonverbal cues that suggested a patient might have less social support than their chart indicated.
So the nurses weren't looking at static risk factors.
No, they were assessing the trajectory of recovery.
And Clara's breakthrough was?
It was explicitly designing the AI's architecture to mirror this nuanced, nonlinear human intuition. She was effectively hard-coding the seasoned professional's gut feeling into the model itself.
And that shifted the AI from just being a calculator to being a true collaborator.
A true collaborator.
Yes. So if we define human-centered AI, HCAI, it really seems rooted in a socio-technical perspective.
That's the perfect way to frame it. HCAI is an emergent field that focuses on the joint optimization of social systems. So human expertise, organization structure, and technical systems. The AI algorithms.
And the goal is augmentation.
The goal is augmentation. To enhance human performance, not replace it. It requires incorporating that essential human knowledge, intuition, abstract thinking, context experience that purely data-driven AI systems inherently lack.
So HCI isn't just a philosophical concept. It sounds like a design mandate that prioritizes leveraging the human brain's nonlinear capabilities.
It's absolutely a design mandate. And while, when market pressure often pushes for pure automation, just replacing human tasks to reduce cost,
HCAI focuses on augmentation through automation.
Exactly. The machine should automate the rote, repetitive tasks, which frees up human energy for the higher-level, intuitive, nonlinear analysis that only the human brain can perform.
Okay, so if we are going to merge human intelligence, or HI, and AI successfully, we need some formalized rules. Research suggests there are 3 critical design principles for building these hybrid decision support systems.
That's right. And the first one deals with how the two intelligences actually interact.
What is it?
Design principle 1, amplified decision-making. This mandates procedural support for exploiting both HI and AI because their combination forms a superior decision base.
So the human brings context, experience, abstract thinking.
And the AI brings the factual processing and the heavy analytical capabilities.
I have to imagine that the most valuable interaction point is when they disagree.
That's where the real deep dive happens. If HI and AI both agree, great, your decision confidence is high.
But when they contradict each other?
When the human expert says yes and the machine says no, or vice versa, the decision basis is inconclusive. That contradiction is the procedural trigger that mandates a deeper investigation.
So the system amplifies human judgment by forcing them to confront where their intuition diverges from the facts the machine is presenting.
Precisely.
Okay, so the second principle has to address human fallibility, specifically our biases.
Yes. Design principle 2, unbiased decision-making. Human judgment is, as we know, prone to biases. To reduce that uncertainty and those biases, this principle requires involving multiple functional roles from across different organizational units.
You mean bringing in people from sales, logistics, customer service?
All of them. You bring multiple perspectives to the table. This promotes cooperative knowledge sharing and consensus-based decision-making.
Which moves knowledge beyond those unit silos and into real organizational learning.
It does.
And the procedure for this consensus building is highly specific, isn't it? To prevent one of the strongest human biases, which is anchoring.
It is absolutely essential. The AI response must be hidden until the human participants have formulated their own initial consensus.
Why is that so important?
Because if the AI's recommendation were shown first, the human group would unconsciously anchor their entire discussion around it.
And that could potentially invalidate their own collective experience.
It would. So only after the human consensus is formed is the AI response then introduced as the final data point in the decision process.
So we're essentially preventing the AI from being a smug boss who just tells the humans, see, I told you so.
That's a very good way to put it. It forces genuine, unanchored human expertise to emerge first.
And finally, that brings us to the principle of mutual growth.
Design Principle 3, Human and AI Learning. This requires procedural support for mutual human and machine learning. It has to foster a truly reciprocal interaction.
How do humans learn in this system?
Humans learn by critiquing the AI's responses. If the AI gives a strange or counterintuitive recommendation, the human expert naturally starts to question the quality and sufficiency of the underlying data.
Is the data corrupted? Are we missing a key variable?
Exactly. And the machine, in turn, learns from that human critique.
How does that work?
The human input identifies deficiencies in the existing datasets and suggests complementary data that the AI should incorporate in future analyses, maybe a new metric or a historical context it was missing.
So this reciprocal feedback loop ensures continuous improvement.
And it turns the system into a truly adaptive organizational asset.
This collaboration structure, it naturally forces a confrontation between two really powerful analytical approaches that both rely on dynamic mathematical models. Structural econometrics, or SE, and machine learning, ML.
Right. And while they share these mathematical roots, their core goals are, in many ways, worlds apart.
And that difference can be beautifully distilled into two words: prediction versus inference.
That's it. Machine learning focuses on prediction, finding the best strategy to minimize expected loss. It's what drives all those breakthroughs in weak AI applications, like optimizing board game moves or identifying objects in pictures.
Whereas structural econometrics, SE, focuses on inference.
It does. It's about testing deep theories about unobservable structural objects, things like preferences, beliefs, utility, and welfare.
So, to put it simply, ML tells us what will happen or maybe what to do right now.
While SE attempts to understand why people behave the way they do and how they should behave under different conditions, it's trying to get at the underlying structure, the abstract objects like the risk aversion of a decision maker that you can't directly observe.
But there is a mathematical connection that links these two fields, one that's responsible for a lot of their dynamic successes.
That link is dynamic programming, or DP.
Okay.
DP is the underlying optimization principle used to solve sequential decision problems. It's the engine behind the dramatic successes in ML, like the performance of deep reinforcement learning systems like AlphaZero.
And it's also the mathematical foundation for most of the complex dynamic modeling in structural econometrics.
It's the common language, in a way.
Okay, but despite the power of DP, both fields constantly run into these non-negotiable limitations on knowledge. The first limit is computational. Just the sheer magnitude of possible states we have to analyze.
That is the curse of dimensionality. In any dynamic programming problem, the state variable, the current configuration of the environment, can assume far too many possible values for us to effectively compute an optimal strategy.
And the classic illustration here is the game of Go.
Yes. Go has over 2 × 10 to the power of 170 legal board positions. It's just computationally infeasible to enumerate and evaluate all those possibilities.
So if you can't even list all the states, how can ML possibly solve these problems?
Well, ML methods, particularly deep neural networks and stochastic reinforcement learning techniques like Q-learning, they seek to approximate the optimal solution.
Approximate it.
Yes. They use these powerful nonlinear function approximators that require far fewer parameters than the total number of possible states. They're essentially generalizing the solution space.
So we are approximating the answer. We're not guaranteeing the true optimal solution.
Exactly. We're getting close.
So if the curse of dimensionality is the limit on computation, the second major limit is the identification problem, which limits inference, our ability to know why something happened.
And this is a fundamental challenge for structural econometrics. The identification problem demonstrates that even if you have infinite data, it is often impossible to learn the underlying structure, the true preferences or utility functions, without imposing strong a priori assumptions.
Okay, so let's make this practical. Let's forget abstract supply and demand curves. Can you give us a real-world identification problem that our listeners might actually encounter in business?
Sure. Think about marketing attribution. You launch a new website design, and at the exact same time, you launch a major holiday ad campaign.
Okay, and you see a huge spike in sales.
A huge spike. The identification problem asks, did the website design cause the sales spike, or was it the ad campaign?
You can't tell them apart.
You can't. You only observe the final outcome, the high sales, which is what we call the reduced form. Without assuming something, say, that the ad campaign didn't affect repeat customers, you can't separate the impact of the two causes.
So the human being, the undercover econometrician, has to step in and apply a strong assumption, even if it feels risky, just to make the model workable.
Precisely. Observing the behavior is insufficient to isolate causality. The mapping between the underlying causes, the structure, and the observed behavior, the outcome, is often many to one.
Meaning that infinitely many different causal explanations could rationalize that observed spike in sales.
And without human insight to provide those identifying assumptions, the structural model simply fails to provide any meaningful inference.
So given the remarkable success of unsupervised ML systems like AlphaZero in games, why can't we just unleash them on economic problems? They're also about optimization, right?
Because the success of unsupervised ML is fundamentally limited to systems where the objective function, winning the game, and the environment, the rules of the game, are perfectly known and rapidly simulatable.
And real-world economic problems are not like that.
Not at all. Problems like setting optimal airline prices or figuring out long-term retirement savings, they involve objectives that are often fuzzy or changing or even unknown. And they exist in complex environments that are extremely difficult to simulate accurately. This is the fuzzy environment problem.
In other words, you can't optimize a system you can't accurately model.
You cannot. The machine can't learn the objective function and the environment without supervision or guidance.
Which is why the most promising path forward involves hybrid actor-critic systems.
Yes, where the human decision-maker is the actor who possesses all the contextual knowledge, and the machine serves as the critic who recommends, analyzes, and predicts based on the data.
We saw this collaboration in a successful large-scale application of dynamic programming, right? Optimizing locomotive allocation for a major railroad.
That case required immense human effort. The railroad didn't just plug in some off-the-shelf ML algorithm. Applying these approximate dynamic programming methods required painstaking human work to build an accurate simulator, the Plasma model.
How did they do that?
By carefully calibrating the model against several years of historical performance data. That involved human ingenuity, iteratively identifying and correcting data deficiencies and structural errors.
So the machine learning optimization only worked after humans had successfully identified and estimated the environment.
That's the key. The human role in inference is indispensable, especially when you're dealing with non-experimental data.
And structural econometrics provides crucial solutions for that.
It provides case-specific solutions for inference using non-experimental data, where we have to deal with endogeneity and confounding variables. But solving these problems, relaxing optimality assumptions, dealing with serially correlated unobserved variables, it requires making appropriate identifying assumptions and deep analysis.
And that process of inference just cannot be automated.
It can't. It still requires human understanding and contextual knowledge.
So moving from the corporation and the lab to society and the classroom, recognizing that we are all these intuitive deep learning machines, it has to have profound implications for how we learn and how we design policy.
It really does.
Let's look at a powerful example of changing the way we teach. I want to focus on Mr. Sterling, the high school economics teacher.
Ah, yes. Mr. Sterling noticed his students found economics dull.
Because it was taught using these simple, static models of supply and demand that just didn't reflect their complex, shifting lives.
So instead, he started treating them as undercover econometricians. He focused his lessons on nonlinear factors and network ties for analyzing local businesses in their own community.
And his students began using concepts like network ties and path dependence to understand that a price change at a beloved neighborhood shop might not cause a simple linear drop in customers.
Right. It might cause the entire shop to collapse once the social tipping point in the community network was crossed.
That approach gave students a practical lens to view these complex realities. It empowered them to see the invisible forces shaping their futures.
And it moved them beyond the simplistic textbook models. It validated their inherent intuitive understanding of complexity.
And this speaks to the need for some profound curriculum reform. The current economics curriculum often seems to privilege mathematical technique over asking important, relevant questions.
That's a huge problem. The emphasis on these highly technical, quantitative tools often acts as a massive barrier to entry.
And it fosters a dangerously narrow focus.
It does. It suggests that the only worthwhile inquiry is that which can be expressed mathematically. And this narrowness, especially in graduate programs, trains lecturers who then perpetuate this simplistic view of the economy.
So what's the proposed solution? How do we counter this narrow focus and create more resilient thinkers?
The best approach is a pragmatic toolkit approach, one that emphasizes practical reasoning and what you might call disciplined eclecticism.
Meaning that students have to be taught that different models apply to different situations.
And that no single textbook model holds the complete truth.
So this would mean integrating concepts that are currently siloed or even completely ignored.
Exactly. The curriculum needs to integrate behavioral psychology, nonlinear analysis, network theory, and institutional knowledge. History, law, context.
The financial crisis really exposed those gaps.
It exposed huge gaps where graduates lacked knowledge of economic history and the inherent instability of financial systems. You simply cannot accurately evaluate empirical data if you don't understand the history or institutional environment behind that economy.
The insights from behavioral economics, recognizing that we're boundedly rational and suffer from limited self-control, they've directly influenced real-world policy through the concept of nudging.
Right. Nudging directly addresses bounded willpower,
which is that human tendency to prioritize short-term desires over long-term plans.
And that leads to problems like procrastination on retirement savings or impulsive overspending. It's why immediate rewards are valued so much more highly than future ones.
So policy uses this understanding of bounded rationality to gently guide behavior.
Yes. Nudging involves designing choice architectures. So, the way options are presented to you. That subtly guides people toward better health or financial decisions without removing their freedom of choice.
So by relaxing the assumption of unbounded rationality,
the focus shifts to normative theories, how boundedly rational agents should behave. And that opens up a tremendous scope for practical applications in public policy improvement.
Okay, finally, let's circle all the way back to organizations, which we framed earlier as complex adaptive systems. If a company is a collective brain, how do we design it to function like a high-performing neural network, to minimize surprise and maximize resilience?
The core insight there is that the company has to be designed as a brain trained to minimize surprise.
What do you mean by that?
The brain is constantly updating its beliefs and aligning its behavior with expectation. The goal is not rigid control, because that just creates brittle systems. The goal is neural adaptability.
Embracing ambiguity and updating a shared world model faster than your competitors.
Faster than your competitors. Exactly.
This means building the organizational structure around shared context and fast feedback loops, almost like a nervous system.
Precisely. And we see 4 key design imperatives here. First, interconnecting teams, like neurons.
Breaking down silos.
Breaking down silos so customer service, operations, and sales can communicate rapidly. You ensure shared data flows and you reduce unexpected shocks.
Okay, second, building adaptive feedback loops.
Just as a neural network adjusts its connections, the company has to create fast feedback loops, using real-time data to adjust tactics continuously.
So this means quickly identifying friction points.
And running cross-functional teams to compare your predictions versus the actual outcomes, refining that world model in real time.
Third, distributing decision-making.
Centralized control just slows adaptation. The principle is to push authority to where the work is actually done, guiding teams by that shared world model.
So you empower teams at the edge.
You empower them. For example, allowing regional managers to adjust prices within defined bounds to meet local, nonlinear market demands. That speeds up response time dramatically.
And fourth, training the company to learn like a brain.
This means deliberately running small-scale experiments, measuring the outcomes, and then scaling what works. And crucially, treating failures as necessary learning opportunities rather than punishments.
So that shared context and continuous learning refines the world model.
And it allows the company to scale with resilience, not with rigidity.
Ultimately, what we've discussed today, it really reinforces a powerful truth. The complex, nonlinear world we inhabit, it necessitates the sophisticated logic of the undercover econometrician.
Our brain really is a constant, intuitive, deep learning machine. It's always measuring risk accumulation, anticipating tipping points, mapping network influence.
And simple averages and linear assumptions are they're inadequate tools for navigating this reality.
Completely inadequate. And this is why the synthesis of human intelligence and artificial intelligence is really the only way forward.
The future isn't about building a machine that replaces the human capacity for nonlinear contextual judgment.
No, it's about building one that collaborates with and amplifies that capacity.
The true power lies in bridging that gap between our innate, intuitive, deep learning, the kind that the operations director used in logistics or that Clara coded into the nurse's AI,
and the formal, sophisticated models we use to analyze the world. The organizations that successfully combine the contextual understanding of the human actor with the predictive power of the machine critic, they're the ones that are embracing adaptation over seeking rigid optimization.